It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon in a peaceful Texas neighborhood. A man's wife stepped outside, walking on her own property, never expecting danger to come from the very people pretending to protect it. But out of nowhere, they confronted her, men dressed like cops, full of authority, but not real officers at all. What followed wasn't just an act of disrespect. It was violence, humiliation, and a blatant show of racism hiding in plain sight. Yet what these imposters didn't know was who her husband really was. And soon, they'd regret ever crossing the line. Marcus Johnson was no stranger to discipline, structure, and hard work. A former Navy SEAL, he had spent years serving his country with honor before settling into civilian life. These days, Marcus wanted nothing more than to focus on his family, his wife, Angela, and their 2 young children. They had carved out a life in what seemed like the perfect suburban neighborhood, tree-lined streets, quiet evenings, and the kind of community where people waved from their driveways. For Marcus, it was a welcome change. The battlefield felt a world away, and the home they'd worked so hard for was supposed to be their safe haven. Angela loved tending the lawn and chatting with neighbors during her afternoon walks. It was their place of peace, a refuge far from the storms of life. But beneath that picture-perfect surface, unspoken tensions lingered. As one of the few black families in the neighborhood, they had already noticed the sidelong glances, the whispered complaints, and the subtle reminders that some thought they didn't belong. Marcus brushed most of it off. He had faced worse, after all. Yet Angela felt it more. The silence when she walked past group gatherings, the unnecessary questions about where she was really from. Little things, but they added up. Still, neither of them expected what happened next. No one could have predicted strangers dressed like authority figures would show up at their doorstep, targeting Angela in broad daylight. And the moment they chose to cross the line was the same moment they picked the wrong husband to underestimate. It started with a knock, sharp, demanding, the kind of knock designed to unsettle. Angela answered the door, expecting a delivery. Instead, she saw 3 men in uniforms, badges glinting, radios crackling, belts weighed down with gear. They carried themselves like police, yet something felt off. She recognized the patches immediately. Neighborhood security, not city police, not county deputies. Just hired men with fake authority playing dress-up in her neighborhood. At first, their tone was condescending. They claimed she was violating some neighborhood rule by walking her own property barefoot. Angela laughed nervously, brushing it off as a misunderstanding. But their smiles didn't change. They weren't here for rules, they were here to intimidate. One of them stepped closer, chest puffed out, voice louder now. He accused her of loitering, of being where she didn't belong. Angela's heart pounded. She knew these tactics. She'd seen the looks before. It wasn't about a rule book. It was about her skin. About reminding her she was being watched. When she pushed back, their posture shifted instantly. Anger flashed in their eyes, and then, without warning, one of them shoved her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. The others laughed as if cruelty was entertainment. Her hands shook, her voice caught in her throat. But fear quickly turned to fire. She told them to leave her property. They didn't. One leaned in close, sneering, before spitting words intended to burn. "You people never learn, do you?" Angela froze, not just at the insult, but at the venom behind it. She was humiliated, surrounded, and alone. Her phone was inside. Her children were in the backyard, their laughter faint through the glass door. Panic ripped through her as one man raised his hand, ready to strike again, as if daring her to resist. But before his motion landed, another sound cut through the air, a vehicle door slamming down the street, heavy boots on the pavement. Calm, focused, intentional. Marcus was home earlier than expected. walking toward them with the steady control of a man who'd seen far worse in combat. The men didn't notice him at first. Their attention was still fixed on Angela, still reveling in the power trip. Marcus's eyes locked on his wife. He took in her trembling hands, the redness on her arm, the mockery dripping from the men's smirks. In one breath, his calm dissolved into something else entirely. Angela saw relief in his face, but also something sharper, something the men in front of her could never possibly anticipate. Because the moment Marcus stepped closer, the balance of power in that quiet suburb had just shifted, and none of them had the faintest idea what kind of man they were now dealing with. The men finally noticed him. Marcus's shadow stretched across the driveway like a warning before his voice did. His calm, controlled presence clashed against their arrogance, but instead of backing down, one of the fake cops puffed up his chest and barked at him to stand back. Marcus didn't move. His wife was still trembling, her eyes still wide with fear. He had seen women and children in war zones carry that same look. He knew exactly what an unchecked abuse of power could do, and he knew this was the moment. Everything changed. One of the men stepped forward, jabbing a finger into Marcus's chest, mocking him, daring him to respond. The others laughed, but only for a split second, because Marcus's training kicked in. With a speed and precision they didn't expect, he grabbed the man's wrist, pivoted, and dropped him to the ground in an instant. The sound of the impact silenced the others. Angela gasped, her fear now mixing with disbelief. These weren't unruly neighborhood bullies anymore. They were predators who thought they had easy prey. And Marcus had just shown them how terribly wrong they were. Another rushed him, but Marcus's movements were fluid, practiced, almost surgical. Years of combat discipline flowed through every step, every strike, every counter. These men weren't real cops, but they had chosen the wrong target, and for the first time, their bravado cracked. Panic spread across their faces as reality set in. But even as Marcus held them at bay, the rage inside him burned. This wasn't just about defending his wife. It was about every sneer, every insult, every time they tried to remind his family they didn't belong. All of it boiled over in this single, violent confrontation. The men were scrambling now, desperate, humiliated, and scared, and all it took was Marcus's voice, low, steady, unshaken, to tell them exactly what they needed to hear. They had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. When the dust settled, the uniforms and fake badges scattered across the driveway like discarded masks. The men who had swaggered in with arrogance were now crawling away in shame, clutching their injuries, their false authority stripped bare. For Angela, the trembling finally eased, but the weight of what had happened pressed heavily on her chest. Even with Marcus by her side, she couldn't shake the sting of how easily men had felt entitled to assault her on her own property, simply because of who she was. The neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some had watched the entire encounter unfold, yet not one had spoken up. That silence was its own kind of violence. It was a reminder that people would rather whisper about a family not belonging than confront the ugliness happening right in front of them. Marcus knew he had defended his wife physically, but he also knew the battle wasn't just about fists or skill. This was about a larger war. One fought every day by families like his in neighborhoods, offices, schools, and streets across the country. The fight against the unspoken rules, the double standards, the quiet approval of hatred that only shows itself when it thinks no one will resist. That night, Marcus held Angela as she cried, not because she was weak, but because she was tired. Tired of the stares, the questions, the constant fight just to exist where others never had to prove their right to be. And while Marcus had won that moment, the question still echoed. How many more times will this story repeat before it finally ends? This wasn't just their struggle, it was the story of countless others. And until silence breaks, Until action is taken, until justice truly protects everyone, these stories will keep happening, again and again. So the choice remains. Will we keep looking away? Or will we finally confront the truth head-on?